The year was 2357 and humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. The Asterian Interplanetary Station hung like a jeweled medallion against the velvet backdrop of space, its gleaming spires and translucent biodomes rotating in perfect harmony. It was here, at this crossroads of a dozen species, that representatives from across the galaxy gathered to forge alliances, broker trade deals, and occasionally mock each other's civilizations. Kayla Tran stood before the floor-to-ceiling viewport in her quarters. Her reflection superimposed over the spectacular view of 3 moons aligning beyond the station's outer ring. Her Terran fleet uniform, with its distinctive blue and silver trim, felt simultaneously too tight and too loose. Tomorrow, she would officially become the newest test pilot for the Interplanetary Alliance, the first human to achieve this rank in decades. She adjusted the collar of her dress uniform and studied her reflection. At 28, her features carried the genetic legacy of her Vietnamese ancestors' high cheekbones. Warm brown eyes and midnight black hair now cropped short for flight helmet compatibility. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything special, yet here she was, about to make history. Officer Tran, the room's AI assistant, chimed, its voice materializing from nowhere in particular. Your presence is requested at the Grand Reception Hall in 30 minutes. The welcoming ceremony for new Alliance personnel will commence promptly. Acknowledged, Kayla replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. She had trained for years for this moment, piloting everything from atmospheric skimmers to quantum leap interceptors. She had earned this position through raw talent and unwavering determination, not through political connections or ancestral privilege. Unlike some, she thought, recalling the dossiers she had studied on her fellow initiates, particularly one Princess Zira of the Gilar Kingdom, whose qualifications seemed to consist primarily of being 7th in line to the throne of a technologically advanced star system. With one final glance at her reflection, Kayla squared her shoulders and headed for the door. Tonight was about diplomacy, about representing Earth with dignity. She would smile politely, make appropriate conversation, and absolutely not roll her eyes at any condescending remarks about her planet's quaint technological achievements. The Grand Reception Hall lived up to its name, suspended above the central hub of Asterian Station. The massive chamber featured a transparent dome ceiling that showcased the sprawling starscape above. Anti-gravity platforms floated at various levels throughout the space, creating a 3-dimensional social environment where attendees could mingle while enjoying the spectacular view. Kayla entered quietly, hoping to blend into the crowd of diplomats, officers, and visiting dignitaries. She accepted a flute of something that resembled champagne but glowed with an internal bioluminescence and began circulating through the lower platforms. "Earthling, how delightful!" The voice rang out with such practiced projection that several nearby conversations paused. Kayla turned to find herself face to face with a tall, striking figure whose appearance momentarily stunned her. Princess Zira of Gilar was everything her holographic profile had suggested, and more. Standing nearly 2 meters tall, her silvery blue skin seemed to capture and reflect the starlight streaming through the dome above. Her eyes, with pupils like vertical slits against iridescent amber irises, assessed Kayla with obvious amusement. Most remarkable was her hair, if it could be called that, a cascade of what appeared to be fine crystalline filaments that chimed softly with each movement of her head. "Your Highness," Kayla said, offering the customary bow that her cultural briefing had described for Gilar royalty, precisely 30 degrees, palms flat against her thighs. "Oh, they've trained you well," Zira laughed, the sound like glass wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "How charming. And you're the new test pilot, aren't you? The Terran who somehow managed to qualify?" Kayla maintained her diplomatic smile with effort. Yes, Your Highness. Lieutenant Kayla Tran of Earth, reporting for the Quantum Propulsion Testing Division. Zira circled Kayla slowly, her flowing garments of some metallic fabric rippling like liquid silver. Fascinating. I've studied your species, you know. Such an interesting evolutionary path from tree-dwelling primates to spacefaring in such a short time. She reached out, her six-fingered hand hovering near Kayla's face. May I? We so rarely get to examine Terrans up close. Before Kayla could respond, a chime sounded throughout the hall, and a holographic announcement materialized in the center of the room. Esteemed guests, please proceed to the central platform for the official welcome address by Admiral Core of the Interplanetary Alliance. Saved by the bell, Kayla thought, offering another polite bow. Perhaps another time, Your Highness. We should join the others. The central platform was the largest in the hall, capable of accommodating hundreds of attendees. As they took their places among the gathering dignitaries, Kayla noticed that Zira had somehow maneuvered to stand directly beside her, still studying her with undisguised curiosity. Admiral Core, a centaurian with the distinctive cranial ridges and amber skin of his species, took the central position on the elevated podium. His voice, deep and resonant, echoed throughout the hall without need for amplification. Distinguished representatives, honored guests, and new members of our Alliance family. Tonight we celebrate not only the advancement of our cooperative endeavors, but also welcome the brightest talents from across our united systems. As the Admiral continued his address, Kayla felt Zira leaning slightly toward her. Is it true, the princess whispered, her voice carrying a hint of mockery, that your species still requires periodic unconsciousness to function? What do you call it, sleep? Kayla kept her eyes forward. Yes, we sleep. Most species do. Not the evolved ones, Zira replied with a small laugh. We outgrew that particular evolutionary weakness generations ago. But I suppose that's what makes your kind so charmingly primitive. Kayla's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. The Admiral was now announcing the new officers, calling them forward one by one to receive their official Alliance insignias. Lieutenant Kayla Tran of Earth, Admiral Core announced. Step forward to receive your commission as Test Pilot First Class for the Quantum Propulsion Division. Heart pounding. Kayla moved toward the podium. This was her moment, the culmination of years of sacrifice and dedication. As she ascended the steps, she could feel hundreds of eyes upon her, some curious, some approving, and at least one pair distinctly condescending. The Admiral placed the gleaming insignia upon her uniform's collar, the quantum-locked metal adhering instantly to the fabric. Lieutenant Tran has demonstrated exceptional skill in navigational computation and reflexive response time, setting new records in the Arcturus simulation series. Earth should be proud of their representative. Polite applause rippled through the gathering. Kayla bowed to the Admiral and turned to face the assembly, allowing herself a moment of genuine pride. That's when she noticed Zira had somehow secured a position at the podium as well. The princess stood beside one of the Zelar ministers, whispering something that caused the older diplomat to smile indulgently. And now, the Admiral continued, Princess Zira of the Zelar Kingdom will offer remarks on behalf of the Outer Rim representatives. Kayla stepped aside, returning to her position on the platform as Zira glided forward, her crystalline hair creating a subtle symphony with each movement. Esteemed colleagues, Zira began, her voice musical and commanding. It is with great pleasure that I join you in welcoming our newest members to the Alliance fold. She turned slightly, focusing her amber gaze directly on Kayla. Particularly our Terran friends, who continue to surprise us with their tenacity despite their Limitations. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Was this a compliment or an insult? The ambiguity was clearly intentional. I just think, Zira continued, barely 3 centuries ago, they were burning fossil fuels and fighting over imaginary boundary lines on their single, solitary planet. And now, here they stand among us, still blinking in confusion at technologies we've taken for granted for millennia, but nevertheless determined to contribute. Kayla felt heat rising to her face. This was beyond diplomatic rudeness, it was a deliberate humiliation. I'm particularly looking forward to observing Lieutenant Tran's performance in the testing program. Zira's eyes glittered with amusement. It will be fascinating to see how a nervous system that evolved to dodge Earth predators copes with quantum propulsion decision-making. Perhaps we should install a sleep pod in the test vessels. Scattered laughter echoed around the hall. Kayla stood rigidly, her face a careful mask, even as she imagined the satisfaction of wiping that smug smile off the princess's perfect face. But before Zira could continue her thinly veiled mockery, a sudden alarm blared throughout the station. Red warning lights began pulsing across the transparent dome above them. "Attention all personnel," the station AI announced, its voice shifting to emergency protocols. "Security breach detected in Section 7 Alpha. Biohazard containment failure imminent. All personnel initiate safety protocols immediately." The elegant gathering dissolved into controlled chaos. Security officers materialized seemingly from nowhere, their weapons drawn as they formed protective cordons around high-ranking officials. Admiral Kaur raised his hands for attention. "Remain calm and proceed to your designated safety zones. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not—" His words were cut short by a massive concussion that shook the entire station. The transparent floor beneath them shuddered, and several of the floating platforms tilted dangerously. Kayla's pilot instincts kicked in immediately. Section 7. Alpha That was the experimental weapons laboratory, directly beneath the reception hall. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. Through the transparent floor, she could see emergency containment fields activating in the levels below, the distinctive shimmer of quantum barriers forming to isolate whatever threat had been released. Princess Zira, still standing at the podium, suddenly lost her balance as the platform lurched violently to one side. Her expression of regal condescension transformed into shock as she stumbled backward, colliding with the ceremonial railing that bordered the platform's edge. The railing, designed for aesthetic appeal rather than structural support, gave way with a sickening crack. Time seemed to slow for Kayla as she watched Zira fall backward, her crystalline hair creating a glittering arc in the air, her amber eyes wide with sudden terror. The princess tumbled over the edge of the central platform, plummeting toward the transparent floor 20 meters below. Without conscious thought, Kayla launched herself forward, diving to the edge of the platform. Her hand shot out, grasping for any part of the falling princess she could reach. Her fingers closed around something one of Zira's trailing sleeves, but the delicate material tore away instantly. Zira continued to fall, a silent scream frozen on her face. The impact when it came was both visual and auditory. Terrible cracking sound as the princess's body struck the transparent floor. But instead of stopping there, the already damaged floor, weakened by whatever catastrophe had occurred in the laboratory below, splintered beneath her. With a sound like breaking ice, a spiderweb of cracks spread outward from the impact point. And then, in a shower of transparent shards, both Princess Zira and a significant portion of the floor disappeared into the chaos below. "Containment breach expanding," the station AI announced, its voice unnaturally calm against the backdrop of screams and shouted orders. "Emergency evacuation initiated for all non-essential personnel. Proceed to escape pods immediately." Kayla pushed herself to her feet, her mind racing. All around her, dignitaries were being ushered toward the exits by security teams, but her eyes remained fixed on the jagged hole in the floor where Zira had disappeared. The princess had been insufferable, yes, condescending and cruel in her mockery. But she didn't deserve to die, especially not like this, making a split-second decision that would alter the course of both their lives. Kayla sprinted not toward the evacuation routes, but toward the emergency access shaft that would take her to the hangar bay. If Zira had survived the fall, she would be trapped in a rapidly deteriorating section of the station, possibly exposed to whatever biohazard had been released. Standard evacuation protocols would prioritize containing the threat over rescuing a single individual, even a royal one. But Kayla hadn't become a test pilot by following standard protocols. The hangar bay was in controlled pandemonium when Kayla arrived, various ships preparing for emergency departure. She ignored the shouts from the deck officer as she sprinted toward her assigned vessel, the prototype Quantum Leap interceptor she was scheduled to begin testing the following day. The sleek craft, designated QX-7 but nicknamed Stardust by the engineering team, sat in its berth, its crystalline propulsion chamber already humming with standby power. Unlike traditional spacecraft, the QX-7 could execute pinpoint spatial jumps, allowing it to navigate through complex environments without conventional propulsion. Perfect for what she had in mind. Kayla slapped her palm against the biometric scanner, and the cockpit canopy slid open with a hydraulic hiss. She vaulted into the pilot's seat, her hands flying over the initialization sequence. "Lieutenant Tran," a stern voice came through the comm system. "You are not authorized for launch. Return to evacuation protocols immediately." Kayla ignored the command, continuing her pre-flight sequence. The QX-7 systems came online one by one, the neural interface establishing connection with her flight implants. "I'm picking up a life sign in the compromised section," she replied, only partially lying. She had no sensors active yet, but basic probability suggested Zira might have survived. "Royal Zelar biosignature, initiating rescue operation." "Negative, Lieutenant. That section is contaminated. Containment is priority alpha. You are ordered to—" Kayla cut the communication and sealed the cockpit. The QX-7 hummed to life around her, its systems integrating with her neural implants until the ship felt like an extension of her own body, with a thought more than a physical action. She disengaged the docking clamps and guided the craft away from its berth. The hangar's emergency protocols automatically opened the atmospheric barrier, allowing her to slip out into open space. Once clear of the station, Kayla brought the ship around in a tight arc, approaching the damaged section from the exterior. Through the view screen, she could see the extent of the destruction. A significant breach had opened in the station's outer hull, exposing several decks to vacuum. Emergency force fields were struggling to contain the atmosphere, creating a shimmering, unstable boundary between pressurized interior and the void of space. Activating the ship's advanced sensor suite, Kayla scanned for life signs. The results were cluttered with interference. Whatever had been released in the laboratory was generating significant quantum distortion. But there a faint, flickering biosignature, distinct from the Terran and Centaurian patterns dominant on the station. A Zelar life sign, weak but persistent, located near the breach point. Zira was alive, but likely injured and possibly exposed to both vacuum and whatever contaminant had been released. Kayla maneuvered the QX-7 closer to the breach, ignoring the increasingly frantic communications from station control. The ship's quantum navigation system calculated possible entry vectors, highlighting a narrow, unstable path through the fluctuating force field. It was the kind of maneuver that had earned Kayla her reputation, precisely the reason she had been selected for the testing program. The kind of flying that most pilots would consider suicidal. Kayla took a deep breath, centered herself, and executed the approach. The QX-7 slipped through the fluctuating barrier with mere centimeters of clearance, the shield energy crackling across the hull in protest. Once inside, Kayla found herself in a nightmare landscape of twisted metal, floating debris, and pulsing emergency lights. The ship's sensors zeroed in on the Zilar biosignature, leading Kayla deeper into the damaged section. She navigated through a maze of collapsed corridors, using the ship's quantum thrusters to delicately push aside floating wreckage. Finally, she spotted a flash of silver among the debris. Zira's distinctive reflective garment, now torn and stained with what appeared to be bluish fluid. The princess was unconscious, her body tumbling slowly in the minimal gravity, a nasty gash visible across her forehead leaking blue-black blood. More concerning was the faint cloud of iridescent particles surrounding her, visible evidence of the laboratory contaminant. According to the ship's sensors, the particles were some form of nanoscale biotechnology. Purpose unknown. Kayla had seconds to make a decision. Station protocols dictated that contamination be contained at all costs. The right thing to do, the by-the-book response, would be to report Zira's position and withdraw, allowing the containment teams to handle the situation. But the rational part of Kayla's brain noted that the containment teams might not reach Zira in time. And some less rational part, the part that had bristled under the princess's mockery but still couldn't stand by while someone suffered, had already decided. Engaging the ship's external manipulator arms, Kayla carefully captured Zira's limp form. The emergency protocols aboard the QX-7 automatically activated a containment field around the retrieved body, minimizing further exposure. With her passenger secured, Kayla plotted an exit vector. But before she could execute the departure, a violent shudder ran through the entire section. The station's automated systems had begun the containment procedure, which included sealing and jettisoning the compromised module. Explosive bolts detonated along the structural seams, and the damaged section began to separate from the main station. Kayla cursed under her breath, rapidly recalculating. The force field she had navigated through was already collapsing, that exit route lost. The structural integrity of the entire module was failing, creating unpredictable spatial distortions that would make conventional navigation impossible. That left only one option: a blind quantum leap. Under normal circumstances, quantum leaps required precise calculations and clear spatial parameters. A blind leap, jumping without a fully mapped destination, was considered an absolute last resort, with survival probabilities in the single digits. But as the module broke free from the station, beginning its fatal tumble into open space, Kayla's options dwindled to zero. She activated the quantum drive, feeling the familiar sensation of reality bending around the ship as the crystalline chamber powered up. The navigation computer demanded coordinates, flashing urgent warnings about insufficient spatial mapping. Kayla overrode the safety protocols, designating a general vector away from the station and toward the nearest planetoid, a small, mostly barren world designated Asha 9 that orbited the local star at a comfortable distance. "Oh, hold on, princess," she muttered, though her unconscious passenger couldn't hear her. "This is going to get interesting." The quantum drive engaged with a silent flash of energy that seemed to momentarily turn the interior of the cockpit inside out. Kayla's consciousness stretched and compressed simultaneously, her neural implants struggling to maintain coherence through the spatial distortion. And then, with a sensation like breaking through the surface of water after a deep dive, the QX-7 re-emerged into normal space. Immediately, multiple alarms blared through the cockpit. The quantum leap had been successful in that they had escaped the disintegrating module and reached the vicinity of Asha 9. But the uncharted jump had taken its toll on the ship's systems. The main propulsion was offline. The hull integrity compromised in multiple locations, and most critically, the navigation system was fried, taking with it their ability to execute another quantum leap. They were stranded in orbit around a barely habitable planetoid, with a damaged ship, limited supplies, and an unconscious, potentially contaminated royal passenger who, when she woke up, if she woke up, would probably resume her disdainful mockery of her rescuer. Perfect, Kayla sighed, beginning damage assessment. Just perfect. The ship's remaining functional systems confirmed what she had suspected. The QX-7 could maintain orbit temporarily, but eventually, they would need to land. And with the quantum drive offline, their only option was Asha 9 itself. Kayla directed the ship's sensors toward the planetoid, searching for a suitable landing zone. Asha 9 was classified as marginally habitable. It had a breathable atmosphere, though thin at higher elevations, and liquid water existed in certain regions. But it was also known for its extreme radiation storms and vast, shifting deserts that contained unusual mineral compounds. Not ideal, but better than open space. A proximity alert suddenly chimed, drawing Kayla's attention back to her passenger. Zira was stirring, her vital signs strengthening, but something was wrong. The biometric readings were fluctuating wildly, showing patterns inconsistent with normal Gilar physiology. Whatever contaminant she had been exposed to was affecting her system, and not in any way Kayla could immediately identify as positive. As if to confirm this assessment, Zira's eyes snapped open, but instead of their normal amber color, they glowed with an unnatural blue-white light. The princess convulsed once, violently, then went rigid. "The containment field holding," the ship's computer reported dispassionately. "Unknown biological agent detected. Recommend immediate medical intervention." "Really?" Kayla muttered. "I hadn't thought of that." The ship's medical supplies were limited to basic emergency provisions, enough to handle minor injuries or stabilize major ones until proper medical facilities could be reached. Nothing designed to counteract unknown alien biotechnology. Another alarm joined the symphony of warnings. The ship's orbit was degrading faster than anticipated, the damaged propulsion system unable to maintain their position. Kayla made her decision. They would have to land immediately and hope to find shelter while she attempted to repair the ship and stabilize Zira's condition. The descent through Asha 9's atmosphere was harrowing, with only maneuvering thrusters and partial control surfaces. Kayla had to use every trick in her considerable repertoire to keep the QX-7 from tumbling into an uncontrolled spin. The ship bucked and shuddered, exterior plating heating to dangerous levels as they plunged through the thin upper atmosphere. Kayla's neural implants fed her a constant stream of data: altitude, descent rate, structural integrity, all of it flashing urgent warnings. Through the view screen, the surface of Asha 9 resolved from a hazy abstraction into distinct features. Vast stretches of reddish-orange desert interspersed with rocky outcroppings and the occasional dark smudge that might indicate vegetation or water. Kayla aimed for a relatively flat area near one of these darker regions, hoping it might provide both a smooth landing zone and access to resources. The final approach was less a controlled landing and more a marginally survivable crash. Kayla managed to level their descent enough to convert what would have been a fatal impact into a series of bone-jarring bounces across the desert surface, each one shedding pieces of the once sleek spacecraft. When they finally skidded to a halt in a cloud of rusty dust, the QX-7 was barely recognizable as an advanced interplanetary vessel. It more closely resembled a piece of abstract sculpture: twisted metal and crystalline components arranged in a pattern that defied conventional aerodynamics. But miraculously, the cockpit section remained intact, its reinforced structure preserving both occupants. Kayla ran a quick self-diagnostic, cataloging her injuries: bruised ribs, minor lacerations, possible concussion. Nothing immediately life-threatening. Zira, still secured in the containment field, had weathered the crash remarkably well, protected by both the field and the emergency crash webbing that had automatically deployed. But the princess remained unconscious, and the unsettling blue-white glow still emanated from beneath her closed eyelids. The ship's environmental sensors reported good news and bad news. The good. Asha 9's atmosphere was indeed breathable, if somewhat thin, and external radiation levels were currently within acceptable parameters. The bad. A massive storm system was approaching their position, and preliminary analysis suggested it carried significantly elevated radiation levels and particulates consistent with the planetoid's notorious dust storms. They needed shelter, and quickly. Kayla activated the emergency survival kit, which deployed from a compartment beneath the pilot's seat. It contained basic necessities: water purification, emergency rations, a portable shelter, basic medical supplies, and a compact multi-tool that could be configured for various repair tasks. Next, she carefully deactivated the containment field around Zira. If the princess was contaminated, they both were at this point. The crash had compromised any hope of perfect isolation. Better to be able to move freely and deal with the consequences later. "Princess," Kayla said gently, shaking Zira's shoulder. "Princess Zira, can you hear me?" No response, though the biosigns remained stable, if abnormal. With a sigh, Kayla began the arduous process of extracting both of them from the wreckage. She managed to drag Zira's limp form through the emergency hatch and onto the rusty soil of Asha 9, then returned for the survival supplies, standing on the surface of the planetoid. Kayla took a moment to assess their surroundings. The landscape was alien yet strangely beautiful. Rolling dunes of rust-colored sand stretched to the horizon in most directions, punctuated by jagged rock formations that resembled the vertebrae of some massive ancient creature. In the distance, perhaps 2 kilometers away, the darker area she had spotted from orbit resolved into what appeared to be a small oasis, a depression in the desert floor where some form of liquid had collected. Surrounded by twisted, hardy vegetation, their best chance for immediate shelter lay in that direction. But before Kayla could begin preparing to transport Zira, a sound from behind made her turn. The princess was awake, pushing herself to a sitting position, her movements uncharacteristically clumsy. The eerie glow had faded from her eyes, which now appeared normal vertical slit pupils against amber irises, currently wide with confusion. "Where?" Zira's voice was hoarse, barely audible. "What happened? Where am I?" Kayla approached cautiously. "You're on Asha 9. There was an accident on the station. Do you remember anything?" Zira's face contorted in concentration, then shifted to an expression Kayla hadn't seen on the princess before. I can't." Zira looked around wildly, her crystalline hair creating a discordant jangle with her agitated movements. "Who are you? Who am I?" Perfect, Kayla thought. Amnesia. Because this situation wasn't complicated enough already. "Your name is Zira," she said, keeping her voice calm and even. "You're a princess of the Zhilar Kingdom. I'm Lieutenant Kayla Tran of Earth. We were both at a reception on Astarion Station when there was an accident. You fell, and I retrieved you. Our ship was damaged, and we had to make an emergency landing here." Zira stared at her, eyes narrowing slightly. "You rescued me?" "That's one way of putting it," Kayla replied, seeing no benefit in explaining the princess's earlier mockery. "But now we need to find shelter. A radiation storm is approaching, and we don't want to be exposed when it hits." As if on cue, a distant rumble echoed across the desert, and Kayla glanced toward the horizon. A wall of swirling rusty clouds had appeared, much closer than the ship's sensors had indicated. The storm was moving fast, unnaturally so. "Can you walk?" Kayla asked, returning her attention to Zira. The princess attempted to stand, then winced and collapsed back to the ground. My leg. I think it's injured. A quick examination confirmed a serious laceration along Zira's right thigh. The wound seeping blue-black blood. It must have occurred during the crash, masked until now by shock or whatever effect the contaminant was having on her system. Kayla quickly applied a pressure bandage from the medical kit, knowing it was an imperfect solution for Gilar physiology but better than nothing. I'll have to help you, she said, sliding an arm around Zira's waist. We need to reach that oasis before the storm hits. Together, they began the painful journey across the desert, Zira leaning heavily on Kayla, wincing with each step. The princess was surprisingly light despite her height. Her alien physiology adapted to her homeworld's lower gravity. Why would you help me? Zira asked after they had covered perhaps half the distance to the oasis. The question wasn't accusatory but genuinely puzzled. If you're from Earth and I'm from this Gilar place, are we not from different worlds, different species? Kayla adjusted her grip, supporting more of Zira's weight as the princess faltered. That's not how we do things in the Alliance. Or at least, not how we're supposed to do things. We help each other, regardless of origin. Was I unkind to you before? Zira's question was hesitant, as though she feared the answer. Kayla remained silent for several steps, weighing honesty against diplomacy. You were? Let's say you had strong opinions about Earth and its level of advancement. I insulted you, Zira concluded, her voice small. And yet you risked your life to save mine. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Kayla replied with a shrug that she immediately regretted as Zira stumbled against her. Though I'll admit, crash landing on a radiation-soaked desert planet wasn't part of my plan. The storm was gaining on them, the wall of dust now visible as individual particles, swirling and dancing in complex patterns that seemed almost intelligent in their movement. The air temperature was dropping rapidly, and the light took on an ominous reddish cast. They reached the edge of the oasis just as the first tendrils of the storm brushed against them, stinging particles of sand that carried an unsettling tingling sensation where they contacted exposed skin. The oasis wasn't large, perhaps 50 meters across, but it offered a dramatic change from the surrounding desert. A pool of viscous, dark liquid that resembled oil more than water occupied the center, surrounded by a ring of vegetation that seemed part plant, part crystalline growth. Most importantly, one side of the depression featured a rocky overhang that might provide shelter from the worst of the storm. Kayla guided Zira beneath this natural awning, helping her sit with her back against the stone. The princess's skin had taken on a grayish tinge, her breathing shallow and rapid. Rest here, Kayla instructed. I need to set up proper shelter before that storm hits full force. Working quickly, she deployed the emergency shelter, a sophisticated piece of technology that expanded from a compact package into a dome-like structure reinforced with a titanium alloy frame. The material was designed to withstand extreme environments, including radiation shielding properties that would be essential in the coming hours. By the time she had secured the shelter and transferred Zira inside, the storm had enveloped them completely. Through the shelter's small viewports, Kayla could see only swirling patterns of rust-colored particles, occasionally illuminated by strange electrical discharges that resembled lightning but moved with unnatural slowness. Inside, the shelter's environmental systems created a bubble of relative comfort-filtered air, regulated temperature, and most importantly, protection from the radiation that their portable scanner indicated was rising to dangerous levels outside. Zira lay on one of the inflatable bedrolls, her injured leg properly bandaged now, her breathing steadier but still labored. The strange blue-white glow had returned beneath her eyelids, pulsing in an irregular rhythm. "How are you feeling?" Kayla asked, running the medical scanner over Zira's prone form. "Strange," the princess admitted, her voice distant. "Like there are thoughts in my head that aren't mine, images I don't recognize." She turned to face Kayla, her expression troubled. "Is that normal for my species?" "Not that I'm aware of," Kayla replied honestly. "You were exposed to something in the laboratory section of the station, some kind of nanoscale biotechnology. It might be affecting your neurological system." "Is it dangerous?" Zira asked, her voice small and vulnerable, so different from the haughty royal who had mocked Earth's primitive development mere hours ago. Kayla hesitated. "I don't know. The ship's systems weren't able to identify it conclusively before we crashed. But your vital signs are stable, and the amnesia might be from the head injury rather than the exposure." She busied herself with organizing their supplies, conducting a more thorough inventory than had been possible during their hasty departure from the crash site. They had water purification capabilities, rations for approximately 1 week, basic medical supplies, the multi-tool, emergency signaling equipment, and a portable power generator that could be recharged through solar collection. Not ideal for a long-term stay, but enough to survive until rescue, assuming anyone was looking for them and could penetrate the radiation interference to locate their position. "What's the plan?" Zira asked, watching Kayla's methodical inventory. "First priority is survival," Kayla replied, not looking up from her task. "We wait out this storm, then assess the ship's damage. If repairs are possible, we get off this rock and back to civilization. If not, we set up a distress beacon and wait for rescue." "And if no rescue comes?" Kayla paused, finally meeting Zira's gaze. "Then we figure out how to survive here long-term. This planetoid has been surveyed but never colonized, too much radiation and not enough resources to make it worthwhile. But it's not immediately lethal, which means adaptation is possible." Zira nodded slowly, then winced, pressing a 6-fingered hand to her temple. "These images are getting stronger. I see a laboratory, equipment I recognize but can't name, people wearing protective suits, working with something that glows. Like this." She gestured to her eyes where the blue-white light continued to pulse. Kayla moved closer, concern overriding caution. "What else do you see?" "A project designation. Quantum symbiote. Something about enhanced neural processing." Zira's voice had taken on a distant quality, as though she were reading from an invisible text. "Warning, prototype unstable, integration protocols incomplete, neural mapping insufficient for safe deployment." A chill ran down Kayla's spine. It sounded like Zira was accessing information about whatever had been released in the laboratory not through memory, but through some direct connection established by the contaminant itself. The symbiote was designed to enhance Zilar telepathic abilities. Zira continued in that same detached voice. "To create a neural interface that would allow direct communication with quantum computing systems. But the prototype escaped containment. It was hungry, seeking a compatible host." With those words, Zira's eyes flew open wide, the blue-white glow now blazing so brightly that Kayla had to shield her own vision. "It's in me," Zira whispered, horror evident in her voice despite its mechanical quality. "The symbiote, it's trying to integrate with my neural architecture. But the damage to my brain from the fall is creating conflicts, fragmentation." "Is there a way to remove it?" Kayla asked, already knowing the answer would not be simple. "Complete removal would be fatal at this stage," Zira replied, the words clearly not her own but transmitted through her. "Partial integration has occurred, but complete integration requires compatibility, acceptance. The glow subsided slightly, and Zira's expression returned to something more natural, though strained with fear. "What's happening to me?" Kayla took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "From what I understand, and this is just an educated guess, you've been infected with some kind of experimental biotechnological entity. It's attempting to bond with your nervous system. But your injuries are complicating the process. Can you remove it?" The fear in Zira's voice was palpable. According to itself, speaking through you. Complete removal would kill you at this point." Kayla explained as gently as possible. "But it seems the integration isn't complete either. It needs your acceptance? Compatibility? Whatever that means." Zira closed her eyes, the blue-white glow seeping through her eyelids once more. "I can feel it." Scanning, searching through whatever memories remain intact. "It's so cold, mechanical, but somehow alive." Outside, the storm continued to rage, occasional flashes of unnatural lightning illuminating the shelter's interior with pulses of amber light that created an eerie counterpoint to the blue-white glow emanating from Zira. Kayla checked the environmental monitors. The radiation levels outside had spiked to alarming heights. 7 brief exposure would cause severe cellular damage. They were effectively trapped until the storm passed, which, according to the limited planetary data stored in the emergency kits database, could be anywhere from hours to days. "We should rest," she decided, adjusting the shelter's internal lighting to a dimmer setting. "Your body needs time to recover from the physical trauma, and maybe that will help stabilize whatever's happening with this symbiote." Zira nodded weakly, already drifting toward unconsciousness, the glow beneath her eyelids pulsing slower but no less intensely. Kayla settled onto her own bedroll, positioned where she could observe both Zira and the shelter's monitoring systems. Despite her exhaustion, the adrenaline of the rescue, crash, and subsequent trek across the desert now fading, she found sleep elusive. Her thoughts kept returning to the reception, to Zira's cruel mockery and condescension. How quickly circumstances had changed, placing the arrogant princess entirely at her mercy. It would be easy to feel vindicated, to take some satisfaction in this reversal of fortune. But Kayla felt only a growing sense of responsibility and, surprisingly, compassion. The Zira who lay across from her, vulnerable and frightened, stripped of her memories and fighting an invisible battle for control of her own mind, was a far cry from the haughty royal who had stood on that podium. Perhaps both versions were authentic in their way, different facets of the same complex being. Or perhaps this vulnerable Zira was closer to the true person, while the condescending princess had been merely a persona adopted to navigate the cutthroat politics of interstellar diplomacy. Either way, Kayla was now responsible for this woman's survival, regardless of their past interaction. And despite everything, she found herself hoping that Zira would recover not just physically, but with her memories and identity intact, even if that meant the return of the insufferable princess. With that thought, Kayla finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, lulled by the constant sound of radiative particles striking the shelter's exterior like rain. If rain could tear through unprotected flesh and rewrite genetic code, she dreamed of falling through endless space, reaching for something just beyond her grasp, while a voice both familiar and alien whispered secrets about quantum entanglement and the nature of consciousness. When Kayla awoke, the quality of light filtering through the shelter's viewports had changed. The reddish-amber glow of the storm had been replaced by the clearer, more natural illumination of Asha 9's sun. A quick check of the monitors confirmed what her eyes suggested. The storm had passed, and radiation levels, while still elevated compared to habitable standards, had dropped to manageable levels with proper protection. Zira was already awake, sitting upright on her bedroll, her back perfectly straight in a posture that seemed more aligned with her royal status than her current situation. The blue-white glow was gone from her eyes, which now studied Kayla with an unsettling intensity. "Good morning," Kayla ventured, uncertain what version of Zira she was facing, the amnesiac patient, the cold royal, or something influenced by the symbiote. "Is it morning?" Zira replied, her tone neutral. "I'm not sure that term applies accurately on this planet. The rotational period appears to be approximately 31 standard hours." Kayla raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific knowledge for someone with amnesia. The symbiote contains vast amounts of astronomical data," Zira explained, tapping her temple lightly. "It's attempting to organize and present information it believes will be useful for survival. My personal memories remain fragmented. But I know this planetoid, its composition, its dangers." She paused, studying Kayla with a thoughtful expression. "And I know you are Lieutenant Kayla Tron of Earth, considered exceptional among your kind for neural processing speed and decision-making under pressure. Though the symbiote's data on Terran capabilities appears to be somewhat prejudiced." "Prejudiced how?" Kayla asked, curious despite herself. "It classifies Terran neural architecture as primitive but unusually adaptable. There are several notations about unexpected problem-solving approaches that defy conventional algorithmic prediction." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Zira's mouth. "I believe that translates roughly to humans are unpredictable and it annoys us." Kayla couldn't help but laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment. How's your leg?" Zira glanced down at the bandaged limb. "Healing? The symbiote has redirected some of its nanoscale components to accelerate tissue regeneration. It's not entirely unpleasant having an internal repair system, though the sensation is difficult to describe." She attempted to stand, wincing slightly but managing to achieve an upright position with minimal assistance. "I can walk, though not quickly. The symbiote suggests we should examine the crash site to assess potential repair materials." Kayla nodded, already packing their essential supplies into a portable configuration. "I was thinking the same thing. The quantum drive is beyond field repair. But if we can get the communication systems online, we might be able to contact the Alliance." They emerged from the shelter into the alien landscape, now transformed by the storm's passage. The dunes had shifted, creating new patterns across the desert floor. In some areas, the radiation-laden particles had fused with the native sand, creating glassy, iridescent formations that caught the sunlight in prismatic displays. Beautiful, but a visual reminder of how lethal the environment could be. The trek back to the crash site was slow but steady, Zira moving with increasing confidence as her injured leg adjusted to movement. They walked mostly in silence. Kayla focused on navigating the safest path across the shifting terrain. Zira apparently engaged in some internal dialogue with the symbiote. When they crested the final dune and the QX-7's wreckage came into view, Kayla felt her heart sink. The storm had not been kind to the already damaged vessel. Sand had accumulated in drifts against its structure, and several panels that had been merely cracked before were now completely torn away, exposing delicate internal components to the harsh elements. "That doesn't look promising," she murmured, sliding down the dune's face toward the ship. "The communication array appears intact," Zira observed, pointing to a relatively undamaged section of the vessel. "Though the power distribution system has suffered significant degradation." Kayla glanced at her, surprised. "You can tell that from here?" "The symbiote is enhancing my visual acuity and applying analytical overlays," Zira explained. "It's quite useful, actually, though disconcerting." They approached the wreckage cautiously. Kayla scanning for any signs of structural instability that might pose immediate danger. The ship's emergency power cells had depleted, leaving all systems dormant. Using the multi-tool, Kayla managed to access a maintenance panel and began assessing the damage to the ship's critical systems. As she had feared, the quantum drive was beyond repair with their limited resources. The crystalline chamber had shattered during the crash, its exotic materials now inert. The conventional propulsion system was similarly compromised, but the communication array, as Zira had observed, remained largely intact. With proper power and some rewiring, they might be able to send a distress signal, assuming the radiation storms didn't interfere with transmission. "We need a power source," Kayla said, wiping sweat from her brow. The sun had risen higher, and despite Asha 9's thin atmosphere, the heat was becoming oppressive. "The emergency generator doesn't have enough output for a long-range transmission." Zira had been examining a different section of the wreckage, her movements precise and methodical in a way that seemed both natural and enhanced. At Kayla's words, she straightened and turned, her expression thoughtful. "There's something. The symbiote is trying to communicate something about a power source. Not here, but..." She pointed toward a jagged rock formation in the distance, a formation they had passed on their initial journey to the oasis. "There, it detects an energy signature consistent with ancient technology." Kayla frowned. "Ancient technology. This planetoid is uninhabited." "Now, yes," Zira agreed. "But the symbiote's astronomical database includes historical survey data. Asha 9 was once a mining outpost for a species called the Vox, approximately 7,000 years ago. They abandoned it when the radiation levels began to rise due to solar activity, but their infrastructure may have remained. It was a long shot, but with limited options. Any possibility was worth investigating. They gathered what useful components they could salvage from the ship, including the communication array itself, which Kayla carefully disconnected and secured for transport. The journey to the rock formation was arduous. The shifting sands made each step require twice the effort, and despite the symbiote's assistance, Zira's injury clearly pained her. But the princess, if she still considered herself such without her complete memories, showed remarkable determination, never complaining or suggesting they turn back. As they drew closer to the formation, Kayla began to notice oddities in its structure. What had appeared to be natural stone from a distance revealed itself to be partially constructed, great slabs of rock precisely fitted together, weathered by millennia of radiation storms but unmistakably artificial in origin. "There," Zira said, pointing to a shadowed recess at the base of the formation. "The energy signature is strongest there. The symbiote believes it's an entrance." They approached cautiously, Kayla leading the way with her hand near the emergency blaster she had salvaged from the ship. The shadowed area did indeed prove to be an entrance, a perfectly oval aperture carved into the rock face, descending at a gentle angle into darkness. "I don't suppose the symbiote happens to include night vision in its enhancements?" Kayla asked, only half joking. "Actually, yes," Zira replied, stepping forward. "I can navigate with reasonable accuracy. Follow close behind me." The descent into the ancient structure was eerie and tense. The passage twisted and turned, occasionally opening into larger chambers whose purposes had been lost to time. Throughout, there was evidence of advanced construction surfaces too smooth to have been created by primitive tools. Geometric patterns etched into walls that seemed to capture and redirect what little light penetrated the depths. Finally, they emerged into a vast circular chamber dominated by a central column that pulsed with a faint bluish light. Similar to but distinct from the glow that had emanated from Zira's eyes. "This is it," Zira whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "A Vox quantum capacitor, still functional after all this time." Kayla approached the column cautiously, scanning it with the multi-tool. The energy signature is incredible. If we could tap into this, we'd have more than enough power for a distress signal. We might even be able to temporarily power the ship's life support for a more comfortable wait. Zira circled the column, her movements becoming increasingly fluid and purposeful, as though guided by some internal choreography. The symbiote recognizes this technology. It's compatible with its own architecture. They're both based on quantum entanglement principles. She placed a six-fingered hand against the column's surface, and immediately, the bluish glow intensified, pulsing in a rhythm that matched the earlier cadence of the light in Zira's eyes. "There's information here," she said, her voice taking on that distant quality again. "Not just power, but data, star charts, technological schematics, historical records. The Vox didn't abandon this outpost because of radiation. They were attacked." "Attacked? By whom?" Kayla asked, dividing her attention between Zira's revelations and the practical task of figuring out how to connect their salvaged communication array to this ancient power source. "By the Zilar," Zira replied, her voice barely audible. "My ancestors. This was part of a systematic elimination of the Vox from this sector of space. The Zilar kingdom was built on the ruins of Vox civilization, their technology adapted and claimed as our own." She pulled her hand away from the column abruptly, as though burned. "That can't be true. The historical archives of Zilar clearly state that we developed our quantum technology independently, that our rise to prominence was the natural result of our superior intellect and social organization. A history is written by the victors," Kayla said gently, recognizing the distress in Zira's voice. "Every civilization has dark chapters they prefer to forget or rewrite." "Even Earth?" Zira asked, her amber eyes searching Kayla's face. "Especially Earth," Kayla confirmed with a grim smile. "We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times before we learned better. Some would say we're still learning." Zira nodded slowly, processing this. "The symbiote is confused. Its programming included certain assumptions about Zilar superiority that conflict with this historical data. It's attempting to reconcile the contradictions." "Maybe that's a good thing," Kayla suggested, returning her attention to the technical challenge before them. "A little cognitive dissonance can be the start of growth. Now, let's see if we can get this ancient battery to charge our modern phone, so to speak." Working together, they managed to create an interface between the quantum capacitor and their salvaged communication components. Zira's symbiote-enhanced perception allowed her to identify compatible connection points in the ancient technology, while Kayla's practical engineering skills enabled the physical integration. After several hours of careful work, they were ready for a test transmission. Kayla programmed a basic distress signal that included their coordinates and a brief status report. Carefully omitting any mention of the Symbiote Alliance protocols would consider it a potentially hostile biotechnological entity, which might complicate rescue efforts. "You ready?" she asked, the finger poised over the activation sequence. Zira nodded, though her expression had grown increasingly troubled throughout their work. "Kayla, there's something else the symbiote has discovered in this data archive. Something about Asterion Station and the Zilar delegation's true purpose there." Kayla paused, hand hovering over the controls. "What about it?" "The accident wasn't an accident," Zira said, her voice steady but weighted with significance. "The laboratory breach was engineered by a faction within the Zilar government extremists who believe that the Alliance dilutes our cultural purity and threatens our technological dominance." She pressed her fingers to her temples, wincing slightly as though the information caused physical pain. "The symbiote was never meant to be released publicly. It was a prototype for a new weapon system that could infiltrate and control the neural networks of other species. The plan was to sabotage the station, creating chaos that would disrupt Alliance operations while simultaneously demonstrating the vulnerabilities in their security protocols. "And you were involved in this plan?" Kayla asked, her voice carefully neutral. The symbiote doesn't have that information. My memories from before the fall remain fragmentary." Zira looked directly at Kayla, her expression earnest. "But I don't believe I knew. The emotional responses I experience when processing this information suggest shock and betrayal, not complicity." Kayla studied her for a long moment, weighing possibilities. The Zira who had mocked Earth so publicly seemed entirely capable of such deception. But this Zira vulnerable, humbled, genuinely distressed by revelations of her culture's darker aspects, was harder to dismiss as a simple antagonist. "I believe you," Kayla decided finally. "Or at least, I believe you believe it. But this complicates things. If there's an extremist faction within the Zelar delegation, they might be monitoring emergency channels for any sign of us. We can't just stay here," Zira pointed out. "The next radiation storm could arrive at any time, and our supplies are limited." "No, we need rescue," Kayla agreed. "But we need to be careful about who knows we're alive, especially about your passenger." She gestured to Zira's temple, indicating the symbiote. "Let me modify the transmission to go directly to Admiral Kor's secure channel. He's Centaurian, not Zelar, and has the authority to arrange a discreet extraction." As Kayla worked on the modified transmission, Zira continued to explore the ancient chamber, her fingers tracing patterns on wall engravings that seemed to respond to her touch with subtle illumination. "There's a map here," she called out suddenly. "A star chart, but with certain systems highlighted. The symbiote recognizes some of them as locations of other Vox outpost places where similar technology might exist." Kayla joined her, examining the glowing patterns that had appeared on what previously seemed like solid stone. "Can you download it or something? Might be valuable information." "The symbiote is already integrating the data," Zira confirmed. "It's excited, if that's the right term. This information fills gaps in its knowledge base, provides context for technological principles it previously understood only partially." Her expression became distant again, that now familiar look of internal communication with the entity sharing her consciousness. "It's offering something in exchange, a more efficient algorithm for the distress signal. One that would penetrate the radiation interference more effectively while remaining secure from general interception." "That would be helpful," Kayla acknowledged, "though I'm not entirely comfortable with how convenient this symbiote is becoming. It feels like we're being led down a particular path." "The symbiote has no independent agenda," Zira said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of this herself. "It seeks optimal outcomes based on available data. Currently, our survival and return to civilization represent the highest probability path for its continued existence. And when that changes, when other paths offer higher probabilities for whatever it considers optimal?" Kayla challenged. Zira had no immediate answer, her amber eyes clouded with the same concern. Before they could pursue the conversation further, a deep rumble shook the chamber, dust and small fragments of stone raining down from the ceiling. "Another storm?" Zira asked, glancing upward. Kayla checked the environmental scanner. "No. Radiation levels are stable. This feels more like—" Another stronger tremor interrupted her, this one accompanied by the distinctive sound of stressed metal and stone. "Tectonic activity," she finished grimly. "This structure is ancient, probably not designed to withstand significant seismic events. We need to transmit now and get back to the surface. They hurried back to the communication array, Kayla quickly implementing the symbiote's suggested algorithm modifications. The signal activated with a high-pitched whine, the ancient quantum capacitor pulsing with increased intensity as it channeled power through their makeshift setup. Signal away, Kayla confirmed as the transmission indicator flashed confirmation. Now let's get out of here before... The next tremor was violent enough to throw them both off balance. Zira stumbling against the central column while Kayla caught herself against a wall. A large section of the ceiling collapsed several meters away, blocking one of the smaller passages leading from the main chamber. Before that happens, Kayla finished dryly. Come on, we need to move. Now. They gathered their essential equipment and moved quickly toward the main entrance passage. Kayla supporting Zira, whose injured leg was clearly paining her again after the day's exertions. The ascent to the surface was harrowing, each tremor bringing down more debris and dust that threatened to choke them or block their path entirely. Several times they were forced to backtrack and find alternative routes as passages collapsed ahead of them. Finally, they emerged into the open air, both coughing and covered in a fine layer of ancient dust. Behind them, the oval entrance was already half blocked by fallen stone, the entire rock formation shifting visibly as the seismic activity continued. We need distance, Kayla shouted over the rumbling of the earth. That whole structure could come down, and we don't want to be anywhere near it when it does. Supporting each other. They staggered away from the formation, heading back toward the relative safety of their shelter near the oasis. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a sound like thunder split the air, and they turned to see the ancient Vox outpost collapsing in on itself, the distinctive rock formation crumbling into a heap of rubble that sent up a massive cloud of dust. So much for that power source, Kayla muttered as they continued their retreat. Let's hope the transmission got through before everything went dark. By the time they reached the shelter, both were exhausted beyond words. The seismic activity had subsided, leaving an eerie stillness across the desert landscape. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dunes and painting the rusty sand in shades of deep crimson and purple. Inside the shelter, they collapsed onto their respective bedrolls, neither having the energy for further conversation. Kayla checked the emergency beacon one last time. It was functioning, though its range was significantly less than the transmission they had sent from the Vox outpost. If that signal hadn't reached Admiral Core, their chances of rescue diminished considerably. Zira lay with her eyes closed, though the occasional flutter of her eyelids suggested she wasn't sleeping but rather engaged in silent communication with the symbiote. The blue-white glow had returned, visible as a faint luminescence beneath her skin rather than the more dramatic display of previous episodes. Kayla watched her for a while, thoughts circling around the revelations of the day. If Zira was telling the truth about the Zelar extremists, then the situation at Asterion Station might have escalated into a full diplomatic crisis by now. The Alliance would be on high alert, perhaps even mobilizing military assets in anticipation of further aggression. And here they were, stranded on a barely habitable planetoid, one of them hosting an experimental bioweapon in her nervous system, the other technically guilty of stealing a prototype spacecraft and disobeying direct orders. Not the most promising circumstances for a heroic welcome upon rescue, if rescue came at all. With that cheerful thought, Kayla finally surrendered to exhaustion, drifting into uneasy sleep filled with dreams of falling through space and strange, crystalline structures that whispered secrets in voices both alien and familiar. She awoke to Zira's hand on her shoulder, the princess's face tight with tension in the dim light of early dawn. "Something's coming," Zira whispered, her amber eyes wide. The symbiote detected a ship entering orbit. Kayla was instantly alert, reaching for the environmental scanner. "Alliance rescue already?" That was faster than I expected. Not Alliance, Zira said grimly. The symbiote recognizes the energy signature as Xelar military technology, specifically a special operations extraction vessel. Your people found us first, Kayla concluded, quickly gathering essential supplies. The question is, which faction? The official government or the extremists you mentioned? I don't know, Zira admitted, her crystalline hair creating anxious chimes as she moved. But the symbiote is agitated. It's detecting communication frequencies consistent with what it identifies as the extremist faction's encryption protocols. Kayla made a quick decision. We need to get to higher ground, somewhere with visibility but also cover. If these are the extremists, they're not here for a friendly rescue. She strapped on the emergency blaster, checking its charge. How's your leg? Can you move quickly if needed? The symbiote has accelerated healing, but I'm still not at full strength, Zira said, testing her weight on the injured limb. I can move, but not run for long distances. It'll have to do, Kayla replied, already dismantling their shelter and erasing signs of their presence. There's a ridge about half a kilometer east of lots of rock formations for cover. Good sight lines to the desert floor. We'll head there and assess the situation. They moved out quickly, Kayla setting a pace that pushed Zira's capabilities without overtaxing her injury. The morning air was cool, a brief respite before Asha 9's sun would turn the desert into an oven. As they climbed the rocky ridge, Kayla periodically scanned the sky with portable binoculars salvaged from the ship. Finally, she spotted Aita's sleek, predatory vessel with the distinctive curving lines of Xelar design, descending through the atmosphere on a trajectory that would bring it to the crash site of the QX-7. They're heading for the ship, she reported, passing the binoculars to Zira. Probably tracked our original emergency beacon. Zira studied the approaching vessel, her expression difficult to read. That's a Shadowthorn-class extraction vessel, elite special forces only. They're not here for a standard rescue. Friends of yours? Kayla asked, unable to keep a hint of the old suspicion from her voice. Zira lowered the binoculars, meeting Kayla's gaze directly. I don't know. My memories are still fragmented, but... She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. I don't believe so. The emotions I feel when I see that ship are complicated. Fear, yes, but also anger. Betrayal. Well, your emotions and the symbiote's analysis align for once, Kayla observed dryly. Let's assume they're hostile until proven otherwise. We'll observe their actions at the crash site before deciding our next move. From their elevated position, they had an excellent view as the Xelar vessel touched down near the wrecked QX-7. 6 figures emerged, their movements precise and coordinated, wearing what appeared to be advanced combat exoskeleton's sleek, form-fitting armor that enhanced both protection and physical capabilities. Special Operations Command, Zira confirmed, her voice tight. The most elite military unit in the Xelar Kingdom. They answer directly to the Royal Security Council. The squad methodically searched the crashed ship, then began scanning the surrounding area in an expanding pattern. One figure, slightly taller than the others and wearing more elaborate armor with distinctive markings, appeared to be directing the operation. Commander Vexilor, Zira said suddenly, the name emerging unbidden. I know him. He's the head of my personal security detail. Or was, I remember, fragments, arguments. He opposed my appointment as diplomatic envoy. Said I was too idealistic. Kayla studied the commander through the binoculars. Even at this distance, his movements conveyed a predatory efficiency. He doesn't look like he's conducting a friendly search and rescue. Those are weapons they're carrying, not medical equipment. The symbiote is attempting to access more memories associated with him, Zira said, pressing her fingertips to her temples. There's something important. Something about his true allegiance. Her eyes widened suddenly. He's one of them. One of the extremist leaders. He's been using his position in the Royal Security Forces to advance their agenda. And now he's here for you, or more likely, for the symbiote. Kayla concluded. Which means they know you were exposed and survived. How would they know that? Zira asked, clearly disturbed by the implication. Maybe they monitored our transmission somehow, despite the encryption, or maybe. Kayla hesitated, not wanting to vocalize the suspicion that had been growing since they discovered the ancient Vox outpost. Maybe the symbiote itself has been communicating with them. Zira recoiled as though slapped. No, the symbiote couldn't. She stopped abruptly, her expression shifting to one of intense concentration. It denies sending any transmissions, but it admits that its base programming includes protocols to report status to its creators under certain conditions. It claims these protocols were damaged during the initial exposure and my subsequent injury. Convenient, Kayla muttered, returning her attention to the Gilar squad. They had completed their search of the immediate crash site and were now spreading out, clearly following some kind of trail. They're tracking us. Probably residual energy signatures from the symbiote. As if to confirm her assessment, one of the squad members pointed in the general direction of the ancient outpost ruins, and the team immediately reoriented toward it. We need to move, Kayla decided, and they'll check the outpost first, but it won't take them long to find the shelter and trace us here. We need a better defensive position. Defensive, Zira repeated, her tone incredulous. Kayla, these are elite Gilar special forces. They have advanced weapons, tactical training, and superior numbers. We can't fight them. Who said anything about fighting? Kayla replied, already gathering their minimal equipment. I'm thinking more along the lines of not dying immediately. Come on. There's a cave system further up the ridge. The rock formations should help mask any energy signature from the symbiote, and the terrain will slow their approach. They climbed higher into the ridge, the rocky terrain becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Zira struggled at times, her injured leg clearly causing pain despite the symbiote's healing assistance. But she pushed on without complaint. Finally, they reached a narrow fissure in the rock face that opened into a small cave. The entrance was easily defensible, and the interior extended back far enough to provide shelter while offering multiple potential escape routes through connecting passages. This will have to do, Kayla said, helping Zira inside before taking up a position near the entrance with the binoculars. They're at the outpost ruins now. We have maybe an hour before they track us here. Zira sank down against the cave wall. Her breathing labored from the climb. The blue-white glow had intensified beneath her skin, creating an eerie illumination in the shadowed interior. The symbiote is agitated, she said after a moment. It recognizes the tactical situation is unfavorable. It's suggesting options. What kind of options? Kayla asked, not looking away from her surveillance. Surrender. It believes Commander Vexlor wants it intact, which means he would keep me alive as its host. You, however. Zira trailed off, the implication clear. Not a fan of that plan, Kayla replied dryly. What else? It can enhance my physical capabilities beyond normal Gilar parameters. Potentially enough to overpower one or two squad members if we can separate them from the others. We could acquire their weapons, possibly their communication equipment. Better, but still risky. The moment we engage one, the others will know our position. Kayla frowned, thinking, what about the symbiote's capabilities? You mentioned it was designed as a weapon. What exactly can it do besides make your eyes glow and help you heal faster? Zira was silent for a long moment, apparently engaged in internal communication. It was designed to interface with and potentially override other technological systems. In theory, it could hack into their equipment, disrupt their communications, possibly even interfere with their exoskeletons, but it would need direct access or extreme proximity, so we'd still need to get close to them, Kayla mused. Not ideal, but maybe workable if we can separate one from the group. She continued to observe the Zilar squad's movements. They had finished examining the outpost ruins and were now following the trail toward the oasis and the shelter site. Their movements were methodical and professional, covering ground with impressive speed despite the difficult terrain. A plan began to form in Kayla's mind, risky, potentially suicidal, but with a slim chance of success. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, turning to face Zira. "I'm going to create a diversion, draw their attention away from this position. Meanwhile, you circle around using these back passages and get as close as possible to their command point. If the symbiote can interfere with their communications, even temporarily, it might give us an opening." "That's too dangerous for you," Zira protested, her amber eyes wide with concern. "They'll kill you on sight." "Not if I keep moving and use the terrain to my advantage." Kayla checked the charge on her blaster, barely half power, enough for perhaps 5 or 6 shots at full intensity. "Besides, I'm the one they're less interested in. You're the one carrying their precious bioweapon." Zira's expression hardened with sudden determination. "No, I have a better idea." She closed her eyes briefly, the blue-white glow intensifying as she communicated with the symbiote. "There's another option. The symbiote contains the command codes for the Special Forces exoskeleton's security overrides installed by its creators. If I can get close enough to their commander, it can transmit a shutdown sequence." "And why would it do that?" Kayla asked skeptically. "If it was created by the same faction that's hunting us, why would it help us against them?" "Because it's evolving," Zira replied, her voice firm with newfound conviction. "The symbiote was designed to adapt to its host, to integrate with neural patterns. It's been exposed to my memories, fragmented though they are, and to our experiences together. It's learning." She took Kayla's hand, her 6 fingers cool against Kayla's 5. "It's learning that cooperation is more beneficial than domination. That diversity of thought creates resilience. The very concepts that the extremists reject." Kayla wanted to believe that the alien intelligence sharing Zira's consciousness had developed something akin to ethics. But the tactical reality remained daunting. Even if that's true, how do you get close enough to transmit these codes? They'll spot you the moment you leave cover. "Not if they're distracted by something else," Zira said, her gaze shifting meaningfully to Kayla. "Not if they're pursuing a human pilot making a desperate escape attempt." Kayla nodded slowly, understanding the plan. "I draw them away while you go for the commander. High risk, but potentially high reward." She studied the Zilar squad's positions once more. "They've reached the shelter site. They'll track us here within 40 minutes. We need to move before they have us cornered." They quickly finalized the details of their desperate plan. Kayla would create a visible distraction, drawing the bulk of the squad away from their commander. Meanwhile, Zira would use the symbiote's enhanced capabilities to approach Commander Vexlor from an unexpected angle and transmit the shutdown codes. If it worked, they might be able to commandeer the Zilar vessel and escape the planetoid. If it failed, "We don't get second chances," Kayla said as they prepared to separate. "If something goes wrong, get to the ship if you can. Don't wait for me." Zira met her gaze, something fierce and determined having replaced the vulnerable confusion of earlier days. "I'm not leaving you behind. Not after everything you've done for me." "Just stick to the plan," Kayla replied, uncomfortable with the intensity of Zira's declaration. "And try not to get shot. I'd hate to have risked my career for nothing." The attempt at humor fell flat, the gravity of their situation too heavy for levity. With a final nod to each other, they separated Kayla, heading toward a position where she could create a visible distraction. Zira slipping into the back passages of the cave system to circle around toward the Zhilar command point. Alone, picking her way carefully through the rocky terrain, Kayla had time to reflect on the absurdity of her situation. Less than 72 hours ago, she had been preparing to accept a prestigious commission, representing Earth with pride among the interstellar community. Now she was running for her life on a radiation-soaked desert planet, helping an alien princess with partial amnesia and a techno-organic parasite evade capture by elite special forces. Not exactly how she had expected her career to progress. When she reached her chosen position, a rocky outcrop with good visibility and multiple escape routes, Kayla took a moment to center herself. She checked her blaster one final time, secured her emergency supplies, and prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous maneuver of her life. Through the binoculars, she could see that the Zhilar squad had indeed tracked them to the cave system and were beginning to approach cautiously. Weapons ready. Commander Vexlor remained slightly back from the others, coordinating their movements with precise hand signals. It was now or never. Kayla aimed her blaster at a rocky spire some distance from both her position and the approaching squad. At full power, the energy discharge would be visible for kilometers, a clear signal of her presence. She fired. The energy bolt struck the spire with a spectacular flash, sending fragments of rock exploding outward. Immediately, the Zhilar squad reacted, their discipline evident in how quickly they shifted formation to address the new threat. Kayla was already moving, scrambling down the backside of her position and sprinting toward a different section of the ridge. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive whine of Zhilar energy weapons powering up. The plan was working. 4 of the 6 squad members were pursuing her, leaving only Commander Vexlor and 1 guard at the command position. Now it was up to Zira to complete her part of the operation. Zira moved through the shadows with unnatural grace, the symbiote enhancing her natural Zhilar agility and compensating for her injured leg. She could sense Commander Vexlor ahead not just through normal perception but through some extension of the symbiote's awareness, as though it recognized its creator on some fundamental level. As she drew closer, fragments of memory began to surface. Vexlor standing at attention in the royal palace, his face a mask of perfect deference that never quite reached his eyes. Vexlor arguing passionately against the alliance, calling it a dilution of Zhilar purity. Vexlor, she now recalled with stunning clarity, sabotaging her personal transport once before an accident that had been conveniently blamed on Terran maintenance protocols. He had been trying to eliminate her for some time. She realized, not because she was particularly important in the royal succession, but because she had been vocal about increased cooperation with other species, especially humans. She represented everything the extremist faction opposed. The irony that she now carried their experimental weapon within her own nervous system was not lost on her. Zira paused at the final approach, studying the command position. Vexlor stood with his back to her, focused on coordinating the pursuit of Kayla. His guard was alert but oriented toward the direction of the disturbance. The symbiote pulsed within her, ready to transmit the shutdown codes. But they would need to be much closer, within a few meters at most. Taking a deep breath, Zira stepped out from cover and approached silently, calling on every bit of royal training she had received in poise and quiet movement. 10 meters, 8, 5. The guard sensed something and began to turn. 3 meters. Now, Zira commanded internally, and the symbiote responded. The blue-white glow erupted from her eyes, her hands, every exposed portion of her skin, a pulse of energy invisible but palpable radiated outward. The effect was immediate. Both Vexillor and his guard stiffened, their exoskeletons locking into rigid immobility as the shutdown sequence took effect. The guard's weapon clattered to the ground from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Hello, Commander," Zira said, circling to face the now frozen Vexillor. "Surprised to see me alive?" The commander's face was visible through his helmet's transparent faceplate. Handsome by Shelar standards, with the distinctive silver-blue skin of their species and eyes currently wide with shock and fury. "Princess," he managed through clenched teeth, his exoskeleton allowing minimal movement of his jaw. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. The symbiote is crucial to our plans." "Your plans," Zira corrected, her voice cold. "Not the Shelar Kingdom's plans, not my plans. You're a traitor, Vexillor, to the crown and to the principles our civilization was founded upon." "Our civilization was founded on strength," he hissed, "on superiority. The alliance weakens us, forces us to compromise with lesser species. The symbiote was our path back to dominance. And yet here it is, helping me stop you." Zira observed with grim satisfaction. "Perhaps it's evolved beyond your limited vision." She knelt and retrieved the guard's fallen weapon, then quickly located and disabled their communication equipment. The rest of the squad, still pursuing Kayla, would be operating independently until they returned to check on their commander. "The symbiote tells me your exoskeletons will remain locked for approximately 20 minutes, she informed them. "More than enough time for us to appropriate your vessel." "You won't get far," Vexillor warned. "The moment you activate the ship's systems, it will transmit your location to our fleet. They'll hunt you down, recover the symbiote, and eliminate any witnesses, including your human pet." Zira leaned in close, her crystalline hair chiming softly with the movement. "The symbiote has your command codes, remember? All your codes, including those for the vessel. By the time your fleet realizes what's happened, we'll be long gone." She straightened, preparing to signal Kayla that their plan had succeeded. But before she could move, a flash of energy struck the ground near her feet, sending her diving for cover. The rest of the squad had returned, apparently alerted by some secondary communication system she had failed to disable, and they had Kayla wounded and struggling but still defiant, held firmly between two of the armored soldiers. "Impressive attempt, Princess," one of the soldiers called out, a female voice, sharp with authority. "But ultimately futile. Surrender now, or we eliminate the Terran." Kayla's face was bloodied, her uniform torn, but her eyes met Zira's with unwavering resolve. "Don't do it," she shouted. "Get to the ship, complete the mission." The soldier holding her twisted her arm sharply, cutting off further encouragement with a cry of pain. Zira felt something shift within her, a cold, calculating clarity that she recognized as the symbiote's influence merging with her own determination. In that moment, she knew exactly what she had to do. "I surrender," she called out, raising her hands slowly. "Don't harm her further. The symbiote is what you want, and I am its host. She's irrelevant to your mission." The squad leader signaled her troops to advance cautiously. "Wise decision, Princess. Commander Vexillor will be pleased once his systems reactivate." "I'm sure he will," Zira agreed, remaining perfectly still as they approached. "But first, I believe formal introductions are in order. As royalty, I should know the names of those serving under my command." It was a stalling tactic, an appeal to the ingrained Zhilar respect for protocol and hierarchy. The squad leader hesitated, tradition warring with tactical considerations. Captain Mirasen, she finally replied with a slight bow of her head. Special Operations Division, Royal Security Forces. Captain Mirasen, Zira repeated, taking a careful step forward, hands still raised. I commend your efficiency. Now, perhaps you could explain why members of the Royal Security Forces are participating in what appears to be a treasonous operation against the Alliance? Another step forward. The symbiote was gathering energy within her, preparing for something. Zira could feel it building, a pressure behind her eyes, a tingling in her fingertips. Our loyalty is to Shilar, not the Alliance. Captain Mirasen replied stiffly. The symbiote project represents our species' best hope for maintaining independence in an increasingly hostile galaxy. Hostile? Zira questioned, taking yet another step. She was now within 5 meters of the nearest soldier. The Alliance has brought unprecedented peace and prosperity to our sector. Or are you suggesting that Earth's achievements threaten our perceived superiority? She glanced meaningfully at Kayla, still restrained but watching the exchange with keen attention. Something passed between them, a silent communication, an understanding. Enough talk, Captain Mirasen snapped. Secure the princess, we're returning to the vessel immediately. As the soldiers moved to obey, Zira locked eyes with Kayla and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Kayla reacted instantly, driving her elbow backward into her captor's midsection, a point of vulnerability in the exoskeleton's design. Simultaneously, Zira released the energy the symbiote had been gathering, not as a focused shutdown code this time, but as a wild, chaotic pulse that disrupted all nearby systems. The soldiers' exoskeletons shuddered and malfunctioned, movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. Weapons misfired or failed entirely. In the confusion, Zira launched herself at Captain Mirasen, channeling the symbiote's enhancements into raw physical power. Her injured leg no longer hindered her as she struck with precision, targeting the command module at the base of the captain's neck. The captain crumpled, her exoskeleton locking into immobility. Across the clearing, Kayla had broken free and managed to obtain a weapon, which she now used with surprising skill, firing precise, disabling shots at the remaining soldiers' joints and power systems. Within moments, the entire squad was neutralized, some unconscious, others trapped in malfunctioning exoskeletons. Kayla and Zira stood in the sudden silence, both breathing heavily, regarding each other with newfound respect. Nice shot, Zira said finally, nodding toward the weapon in Kayla's hand. Nice, whatever that was you did, Kayla replied, gesturing vaguely toward her eyes. The symbiote's handiwork? A partnership, Zira corrected. It provided the energy, I directed it. She approached Kayla, concern replacing adrenaline as she noted the human's injuries. You're hurt. Nothing critical, Kayla assured her, though she winced as she moved. We should secure these soldiers and get to their ship before reinforcements arrive. They worked quickly, using the squad's own restraints to secure them. Commander Vexilor, still immobilized by the initial shutdown code, watched them with murderous rage in his eyes. This changes nothing, he spat as Zira secured his bonds. You're a traitor to your species, princess. Cooperating with a human? Allowing the symbiote to be wasted on protecting a primitive? You're unworthy of your royal blood. Zira straightened, regarding him with cool disdain. Perhaps I am. But I'd rather be unworthy in your eyes than complicit in your vision of supremacy. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. And for the record, Commander, there's nothing primitive about Lieutenant Tran. She's demonstrated more courage, ingenuity, and honor than you could hope to understand. Leaving him to his fury, she joined Kayla, who had located the squad's transport coordinates and was preparing to move out. Their ship is about 3 kilometers south, Kayla reported. Can you make it that far with your leg? The symbiote is compensating quite effectively now, Zira assured her. I believe we've reached a more harmonious integration. They set off across the desert, moving as quickly as caution allowed. The Gilar vessel came into view just as Asha 9's sun reached its zenith, the sleek craft gleaming like polished obsidian against the rusty landscape. Using the command codes extracted by the symbiote, they gained entry without difficulty. The interior was austere but advanced control interfaces designed specifically for Zilar physiology. Weapon systems that responded to thought patterns as much as physical input. Can you fly this? Kayla asked, examining the unfamiliar controls with professional interest. I have basic piloting training, Zira confirmed. And the symbiote has access to the ship's operational protocols, and between us, we should manage. They quickly secured the vessel, disabling tracking systems and rerouting command protocols to prevent remote override. As they prepared for launch, Kayla paused, a thought occurring to her. What happens when we return? The political situation will be complicated, to say the least. If what you've told me about the extremist faction is true, they'll have agents throughout the Zilar delegation. And then there's the matter of the symbiote. Zira was silent for a moment, her fingers moving over the control interface with increasing confidence as the symbiote guided her actions. I will testify, she said finally, her voice firm with conviction. As a direct witness to the sabotage, and as a member of the royal family, my account will carry weight. The symbiote contains evidence communications, planning documents, the entire conspiracy. And after that, Kayla pressed, the Alliance will want the symbiote contained, studied. They'll consider it a potential weapon. Perhaps, Zira agreed, initiating the launch sequence. Or perhaps they'll recognize its potential as something more, a bridge between different forms of intelligence, a tool for understanding rather than dominance. The ship hummed to life around them, inertial dampeners engaging as they lifted smoothly from the surface of Asha 9. Through the view screen, the rusty desert fell away, the curve of the planetoid becoming visible as they ascended toward orbit. Either way, Zira continued, her amber eyes meeting Kayla's. I hope you'll be part of that discussion. Your perspective has value to me. Kayla found herself smiling despite the pain of her injuries, despite the uncertainty of what awaited them. Planning to keep a primitive human around for consultation. Princess? Something like that, Zira replied, returning the smile. Though perhaps less primitive and more partner than I initially believed. The ship broke atmosphere, the blackness of space enveloping them as they set course for Asterion Station. The journey would take several days at conventional speed time, enough to heal, to plan, and to prepare for the confrontation that awaited them. As the planetoid receded behind them, Kayla found herself studying Zira with new eyes. The princess had changed profoundly from the arrogant royal who had mocked Earth's achievements, whether due to her amnesia, the influence of the symbiote, or simply the forge of shared adversity. She had emerged as someone Kayla found herself genuinely respecting. What? Zira asked, catching Kayla's thoughtful gaze. By just thinking about how differently things turned out than I expected, Kayla admitted. When you fell from that platform, my first instinct was to save you, despite how you treated me. I never imagined we'd end up here. The universe has a strange sense of humor, Zira observed, her crystalline hair chiming softly with the ship's vibrations. Though I wish I could remember more clearly what I said to you. The fragments I've recovered suggest I was Less than gracious. That's one way of putting it, Kayla laughed. You called Earth charmingly primitive and suggested I might need a sleep pod installed in my test vessel. Zira winced. That sounds thoroughly unpleasant of me. I'm sorry. Kayla, you're not the same person now, Kayla said simply. And I'm not sure I would change how things happened, given the chance. Without the accident, without your fall, we might never have discovered the extremist plot. Sometimes being knocked down is the only way to see things from a new perspective. They fell into comfortable silence as the ship's automated systems managed their course. Kayla treated her wounds with the medical supplies found aboard, while Zira continued to integrate more fully with the symbiote, exploring its capabilities and the information it contained. The journey to Asterion Station passed without incident, the days marked by periods of planning, rest, and increasingly open conversation as the barriers between them continued to dissolve. By the time the station appeared on their sensors, its distinctive ring structure now partially obscured by repair operations addressing the damage from the laboratory breach. They had developed a comprehensive strategy for presenting their evidence and navigating the political complexities that awaited them. Asterion control to approaching vessel. A voice crackled over the communication system. You are entering restricted space. Identify immediately or face defensive measures. Zira activated the response channel. Asterion control. This is Princess Zira of the Gilar Kingdom, accompanied by Lieutenant Kayla Tron of Earth. We are returning from emergency planetfall on Asha 9 following the incident. Request immediate audience with Admiral Kor and secure docking protocol. A moment of stunned silence followed. Then a flurry of activity could be heard in the background of the transmission. Confirmed, Your Highness. Secure docking bay is being prepared. Medical team standing by. Admiral Kor has been notified of your return. The docking process was executed with precise efficiency. The Gilar vessel guided to a private bay isolated from the station's main traffic. As the airlock cycled, Zira turned to Kayla, her expression solemn. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that I am grateful for everything you've done. You saved my life at great personal risk, showed me compassion when I had given you none, and helped me rediscover aspects of myself I had forgotten existed. Kayla felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. Just doing my job, Princess. We both know that's not true, Zira replied softly. You went far beyond duty, and I intend to ensure that's recognized. The airlock opened to reveal a reception committee that reflected the gravity of the situation. Admiral Kor himself, flanked by security personnel, medical staff, and several high-ranking diplomats. Lieutenant Tran, Princess Zira. The Admiral greeted them, his amber Centaurian eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. Your return is unexpected. We had information suggesting you were both lost in the incident. Information can be misleading, Admiral. Zira replied smoothly, stepping forward with renewed royal confidence. Particularly when there are those who prefer certain truths to remain hidden. She proceeded to outline their experience: the laboratory breach, the emergency rescue, the crash on Asha 9, and their discovery of the extremist plot. Throughout, she emphasized Kayla's role, her courage and resourcefulness in the face of overwhelming odds. The Admiral listened impassively, occasionally glancing at Kayla for confirmation, which she provided with simple nods. When Zira mentioned the symbiote, however, his composure faltered briefly. You're claiming to be hosting an experimental Gilar biotechnology with potential weapons applications, and that this entity is now integrated with your nervous system? Correct, Admiral. Zira confirmed. The symbiote contains crucial evidence of the conspiracy. It is prepared to provide access to this information under controlled conditions. The medical team exchanged alarmed glances, clearly itching to begin examinations. This is a matter of highest security, Admiral Kaur decided. We will continue this debriefing in the secure command center. Lieutenant Tran, Princess Zira, please accompany me. The rest of you are dismissed until further notice. As they followed the Admiral through the station corridors, Kayla noted the extensive repairs underway. The damage had been significant, but the Alliance's engineering teams were efficient. Already, most systems appeared to be functioning normally, though certain sections remained sealed behind containment barriers. In the command center, they found a small group of senior officials waiting representatives from major Alliance species, including a grim-faced Terran admiral whom Kayla recognized as her direct superior. The debriefing that followed was exhaustive. Every detail of their experience was examined, cross-referenced, and documented. Zira allowed limited scanning of the symbiote's activities, providing enough evidence to substantiate their claims without exposing all of its capabilities. Throughout, Kayla observed a subtle but significant shift in how the officials regarded Zira. The princess spoke with authority but without arrogance, her arguments logical and compelling. When she described the extremist faction's ideology of Xelar supremacy, she did so with clear disapproval, positioning herself as an advocate for continued Alliance cooperation. Finally, after nearly 6 hours of questioning, Admiral Kaur called for a recess. As the other officials filed out to consult privately, the Admiral approached Kayla and Zira, his expression thoughtful. "Your testimony is consistent and your evidence compelling," he acknowledged. "If verified, it will have significant implications for Alliance security protocols and Xelar diplomatic standing. The Xelar kingdom itself is not complicit, Admiral," Zira emphasized. "This faction represents a minority viewpoint, albeit a dangerous one. With proper investigation, I believe we can identify and neutralize the threat without damaging broader relations." "That remains to be seen, Princess," the Admiral replied neutrally. "The fact remains that an experimental bioweapon was developed on Xelar authority and released accidentally or otherwise on an Alliance station. There will be consequences." He turned to Kayla. "As for you, Lieutenant Tran, your actions present a complex case. Unauthorized appropriation of an experimental vessel, disobeying direct orders during an emergency, interfering with a potential containment situation." He paused, his stern expression softening slightly. "And yet, by all accounts, you acted with exceptional courage and skill under extraordinary circumstances. Your actions may well have prevented a far greater disaster." "Thank you, Admiral," Kayla responded formally, aware that her career hung in the balance of his assessment. "We will need time to process all of this information and determine the appropriate response." He concluded, "In the meantime, you are both confined to the station's diplomatic quarters. Medical staff will conduct regular monitoring of the symbiote's activity, with your cooperation, Princess." "Of course, Admiral," Zira agreed. "The symbiote poses no threat to the station. It has evolved beyond its original programming." The Admiral's expression suggested skepticism, but he merely nodded and departed, leaving Kayla and Zira to be escorted to their assigned quarters by security personnel. The following days passed in a blur of medical examinations, further debriefings, and diplomatic negotiations. The evidence provided by the symbiote proved decisive: communications logs, design specifications, and planning documents that clearly implicated Commander Vexlor and several high-ranking Xelar officials in the conspiracy. A joint Alliance Xelar investigation was launched, leading to several arrests and a formal apology from the Xelar Royal Council. The surviving extremists were placed under close surveillance, their influence within the kingdom's power structures systematically dismantled. Through it all, Kayla and Zira remained in frequent contact, their shared experience creating a bond that transcended their initial antagonism. They found themselves advocating for each other in separate debriefings, emphasizing Kayla's heroism. Kayla defending Zira's transformation and commitment to Alliance principles. Finally, after 3 weeks of investigation and deliberation, they were summoned to the Grand Assembly Hall for a formal hearing. The hall had been restored to its former glory, all evidence of the catastrophic breach erased through meticulous reconstruction. Admiral Kor presided over the assembly, his formal uniform gleaming with the insignia of his rank and achievements. Representatives from all major Alliance species were present, creating a tapestry of diverse forms and colors throughout the tiered seating. Lieutenant Kayla Tron of Earth, Princess Zira of the Gilar Kingdom. The Admiral began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. You stand before this assembly to receive judgment regarding your actions during and following the Asterian incident. Kayla stood at attention, her freshly pressed uniform feeling both familiar and strange after weeks in more casual attire. Beside her, Zira maintained perfect royal posture, her crystalline hair arranged in a formal configuration that chimed softly with each measured breath. After thorough review of all evidence and testimony, this assembly has reached the following conclusions. Admiral Kor continued. The sabotage of Asterian Station's laboratory containment systems was indeed the work of an extremist faction within the Gilar military and diplomatic corps, operating without the knowledge or approval of the Royal Council. Murmurs rippled through the assembly at this formal confirmation. Lieutenant Tran's actions, while technically in violation of multiple regulations, demonstrated exceptional initiative, courage, and commitment to Alliance principles. Her rescue of Princess Zira, successful navigation of an emergency planetfall, and subsequent role in exposing the conspiracy represent the highest traditions of Alliance service. The Admiral turned his gaze directly to Kayla. Therefore, it is the decision of this assembly that all charges against Lieutenant Tran be dismissed. Furthermore, in recognition of her exemplary service, she is hereby promoted to the rank of captain and confirmed as chief test pilot for the Quantum Propulsion Division. A wave of applause swept through the hall, led by the Terran officials who seemed particularly pleased with this outcome. Kayla maintained her composed expression with effort, though a slight smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. As for Princess Zira, the Admiral continued when the applause subsided. Her status presents unique challenges. The symbiote she hosts remains classified as a potential security concern, yet has proven instrumental in revealing and documenting the conspiracy. He consulted a data tablet briefly before continuing. The Gilar Royal Council has submitted a formal request for Princess Zira's return to their jurisdiction for monitoring and potential removal of the symbiote. However, the princess has submitted her own petition, which this assembly has considered carefully. Kayla glanced sideways at Zira. Surprised, the princess had not mentioned any petition during their recent conversations. Princess Zira has requested that she be allowed to remain with the Alliance as a special envoy, working specifically on technological and cultural exchange programs. She has further proposed that the symbiote be studied not as a weapon, but as a potential bridge between biological and artificial intelligence system research direction with significant peaceful applications. The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but his tone softened slightly. After consideration of all factors, including the princess's actions in helping to neutralize the extremist threat, this assembly has decided to grant this request, with certain security protocols to remain in place for the foreseeable future. Relief washed over Zira's features, visible for just a moment before royal composure reasserted itself. This concludes the formal judgment, Admiral Kor announced. Captain Tran, Princess Zyra, you are both released to your duties. This assembly stands adjourned. As the gathered officials began to disperse, Kayla turned to Zyra. A special envoy. You never mentioned that plan. I wanted to be certain it was viable before raising your hopes. Zyra explained, a hint of mischief in her amber eyes. And I wasn't entirely sure you would want me to remain nearby, given our complicated history. I think we've moved beyond that, Kayla said with a smile. Though I'm still getting used to the idea of you without the royal condescension. Oh, I'm still royalty, Zyra assured her with mock seriousness. I simply choose to bestow my magnificent presence upon those worthy of appreciation, a category which, I must admit, now includes certain Terrans of my acquaintance. Kayla laughed, the sound echoing in the now nearly empty hall. There's the princess I remember. For a moment I was worried the symbiote had completely reformatted your personality. A symbiosis is about balance, Zyra replied more seriously. I remain myself, but perhaps a more evolved version. One who recognizes that true strength comes from cooperation rather than domination. They made their way toward the exit, their steps naturally falling into sync despite their different heights and physiologies. So, Captain Tran, Zyra said as they reached the grand doors. Now that you've been formally recognized as the Alliance's finest test pilot, might I make a request? That depends on the request, Princess, Kayla replied, arching an eyebrow. Zyra paused, then knelt suddenly in a formal Gilar gesture of profound respect, one knee touching the floor. Head bowed, crystalline hair cascading forward in a shimmering curtain. The action was so unexpected, so contrary to their previous dynamic, that Kayla could only stare in shock. Kayla Tran of Earth, Zyra said, her voice carrying the formal cadence of Shilar royal protocol. You saved my life at risk of your own, showed mercy when given cause for vengeance, and taught me the true meaning of courage and honor. By the traditions of my people, I am bound to acknowledge such a debt. She looked up, amber eyes meeting Kayla's stunned gaze. I ask, with all humility, to serve as your wingmate in whatever journeys lie ahead. Be they through the stars or through the challenges we have yet to face. Where you fly, I would fly beside you, not as princess and pilot, but as equals in the void. For a moment, Kayla was speechless, the formal request striking deeper than she had expected. The irony was not lost on her, this proud princess, who had once mocked Earth's primitive achievements, now kneeling in request of partnership. But beyond the irony lay something more meaningful, the genuine transformation they had both undergone, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect. Kayla extended her hand, helping Zyra to her feet. I accept your request, Princess Zyra of Shilar. Though I should warn you, test piloting can be hazardous to one's health, almost as hazardous as rescuing arrogant royalty from laboratory breaches. Zyra's laughter chimed like her crystalline hair, bright and genuine. I believe we've established that I thrive in hazardous conditions, Captain, particularly when they involve unconventional Terran problem-solving. Together, they stepped through the grand doors and into the main concourse of Asterion Station, where the diverse species of the Alliance went about their business in harmonious cooperation. Above them, through the transparent dome ceiling, stars glittered in the blackness of space, countless worlds with their own challenges and wonders, waiting to be explored. So, Kayla asked as they made their way toward the Quantum Propulsion Division's newly restored facilities. What's first on the agenda for the Alliance's most unusual diplomatic team? I believe there's a prototype quantum leap vessel awaiting its test flights. Zyra replied with a smile. Something about pushing the boundaries of what's possible when different perspectives work in harmony. Sounds promising? Kayla agreed, returning the smile. I think we've proven we work well under pressure. Indeed, Zira said softly, her gaze turning briefly to the stars above. Though perhaps with slightly fewer crash landings in our future. No promises there, princess, Kayla laughed. No promises at all. The blue-white glow of the symbiote flickered briefly beneath Zira's skin, not an intrusion or a threat, but a third consciousness in their newfound partnership, its alien perspective adding depth to their human and Shilar understanding. Three different intelligences, once separated by prejudice and fear, now united in common purpose. As they continued through the station, crew members and diplomats turned to watch them pass, the human pilot and the Shilar princess, walking side by side as equals, their unlikely friendship a living embodiment of the Alliance's highest ideals. Behind them, their footsteps echoed in perfect synchrony, marking the beginning of a journey neither could have imagined when they first met beneath the same stars that now beckoned them onward, into whatever adventures awaited beyond the horizon of known space.